Rick Sanchez has died 48 times across the multiverse in the show's canon. Yet somehow, these deaths represent some of the most peaceful and introspective moments in the entire series. In this relaxing compilation, we'll explore how mortality has shaped Rick's character across dimensions, focusing on the gentle emotional undercurrents rather than the sci-fi spectacle. These quieter moments reveal surprising truths about the character that are easy to miss during normal viewing, truths that become apparent when experienced in this calming format. What if I told you that the most sarcastic, nihilistic character on television could actually help you fall asleep? It sounds contradictory at first. Rick Sanchez, with his frantic energy and constant belittling of everything around him, doesn't immediately strike anyone as a source of relaxation. Yet when we isolate certain moments from the early seasons and view them through a different lens, something unexpected happens. In the earliest episodes, Rick establishes himself as completely detached from conventional emotional connections. He presents a worldview that's cynical to its core, leveraging his scientific genius and understanding of the vast multiverse to justify his emotional distance. It's this very detachment, though, that creates an unusual hypnotic quality when experienced in a more contemplative context. Take that iconic scene from the pilot episode, where Rick explains the meaninglessness of school against a backdrop of stars. On first viewing, it reads as pure cynicism, Rick tearing down institutions while floating in space. But through a calming lens, this scene transforms into something more meditative. His philosophical commentary on futility against the cosmic backdrop creates a strange serenity. The vastness of space contextualizes our tiny human concerns, and there's something oddly calming about that perspective. The creators have mentioned that establishing Rick's character in these early episodes was crucial, presenting him as deeply flawed yet brilliant, with cynicism that masks deeper emotional issues. This foundation serves as more than just character development. It creates a philosophical framework that, when slowed down and appreciated without the show's frenetic pacing, becomes almost meditative. What's particularly interesting about Rick's early relationship with Morty is that despite the verbal abuse and apparent disregard, there are subtle hints of care embedded throughout. While he constantly belittles his grandson, his actions tell a different story. He consistently protects Morty from genuine interdimensional threats. This baseline of attachment suggests that beneath the nihilistic exterior, Rick maintains some fundamental connection to his grandson, even if he's unwilling to acknowledge it. The visual language of the show supports this duality. When Rick explains complex scientific concepts, particularly those about the multiverse, these explanations often occur against starry backgrounds. These visuals serve dual purposes. They illustrate his scientific concepts while creating a genuinely calming atmosphere. The cosmic setting transforms what could be disturbing nihilistic concepts into something more like a cosmic meditation. Consider how Rick articulates the implications of infinite universes. In standard viewing, his assertion that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse sounds depressing. But when we slow down and really absorb this idea, it becomes oddly freeing. If everything that can happen does happen across infinite realities, the pressure of any single decision diminishes. This perspective allows viewers to find a strange comfort in cosmic chaos, perfect for transitioning into sleep. Season 1 contains several quiet moments that contradict Rick's stated philosophy of emotional detachment. There are scenes where Rick watches Morty sleep, revealing protective instincts that he verbally denies. These glimpses of vulnerability expose the complex nature of Rick's character, a man whose stated worldview and actual behavior don't perfectly align. The contradiction itself becomes fascinating when viewed without the show's usual intensity. What emerges from these early episodes isn't just chaotic science fiction, but a surprisingly nuanced portrait of a character whose nihilism functions as a defense mechanism. Rick isn't callous because he doesn't care. He's callous because he's protecting himself from caring too much. The cosmic perspective he offers isn't just scientific explanation. It's his psychological coping strategy for dealing with emotional pain. The beauty of experiencing these moments in a relaxing compilation is that they transform the show from chaotic sci-fi adventures into philosophical contemplation. Without the rapid-fire jokes and action sequences, we're left with the deeper currents of meaning that flow beneath the surface. Rick's understanding of the multiverse becomes less about plot devices and more about existential perspectives that oddly complement the pre-sleep mindset. Even the visual aesthetics support this transformation. The show's cosmic scenes, richly detailed star fields, nebulae, and planetary vistas, create natural points of focus for relaxed viewing. These visuals, paired with Rick's philosophical musings, create a surprisingly effective combination for unwinding. The cosmic scale puts human worries into perspective, creating mental space that mirrors the physical act of relaxing. It's worth noting that these early episodes establish patterns of Rick's behavior that will evolve throughout the series. His protective instincts toward Morty, though hidden beneath layers of verbal abuse, form the foundation for their developing relationship. By focusing on these quieter moments rather than the chaotic adventures, we can appreciate the emotional substrate that gives the show its surprising depth. Beneath the layers of verbal abuse lies something far more revealing: the moments when Rick Sanchez thinks no one is watching. Have you ever caught those fleeting seconds when his voice loses its edge and his shoulders slump just slightly? These whispers of vulnerability are so easily missed at normal speed, but when isolated and slowed down, they transform our understanding of television's most guarded character. The most haunting example appears at the conclusion of autoerotic assimilation, a seemingly standard adventure that takes an unexpected turn. After being abandoned by Unity, we witness something unprecedented. Rick returns to his garage workshop, visibly defeated. There's no audience for his pain, no one to perform for, and in this rare, unguarded moment, Rick attempts suicide. This isn't played for laughs or quickly dismissed with a sarcastic comment. Instead, the scene lingers on his despair, showing that beneath the scientist's dismissive exterior exists a man capable of profound emotional suffering when connections are severed. The garage serves as more than just Rick's laboratory. It's where his emotional walls occasionally crumble. When he's alone with his tools and inventions, seemingly engaged in routine maintenance on his spaceship, his expression sometimes shifts from concentrated to contemplative. These quiet moments of mechanical work become meditative spaces where Rick processes emotions he would never acknowledge in conversation. The repetitive motions of tightening bolts or calibrating engines allow his mind to wander to places he typically avoids: his regrets, his losses, and the paths not taken. What's particularly revealing is Rick's relationship with physical mementos, items that should have no value to someone who claims emotional detachment from all realities. In private moments, Rick has been caught looking at family photographs, his fingers sometimes lingering over faces from his past. These silent interactions with his history directly contradict his vocal philosophy about living exclusively in the present moment. The man who insists that attachment is meaningless somehow can't bring himself to discard these tangible connections to people and places he's lost. Perhaps most striking are the rare flashback scenes featuring baby Morty. In these glimpses into the past, we see a completely different Rick, one who speaks softly, whose movements are gentle and deliberate. When interacting with infant Morty, Rick's entire demeanor transforms. His voice rises to a higher pitch, lacking its usual caustic edge. The scientific terminology and defensive sarcasm disappear completely, replaced by simple expressions of affection and wonder. These scenes expose how much of Rick's current persona is intentionally constructed to maintain emotional distance. Creator commentary on these quieter moments reveals they were intentionally placed throughout the series to provide essential context for understanding Rick's character. These scenes aren't merely emotional palate cleansers between adventures. They're deliberate windows into Rick's internal struggle with attachment. His fear of loss drives his need to appear invulnerable, yet these private moments expose the truth. His apparent indifference is merely an elaborate defense mechanism that occasionally fails. What makes these moments so effective for relaxation viewing is their patient pacing. Unlike Rick's frantic adventures, these scenes breathe. The camera lingers on micro-expressions that vanish in an instant. Ambient sounds replace rapid-fire dialogue. The editing slows, allowing viewers to absorb subtle shifts in body language that communicate volumes without a single word. When compiled together, these quiet interludes create a remarkably different viewing experience, one that's hypnotic rather than hyperactive. The contrast between public and private Rick creates the most compelling portrait of his character. When observed by others, he's constantly performing, using humor, intelligence, and aggression to maintain control over every situation and relationship. It's only when he believes himself truly alone that the mask slips, revealing the weight he carries. His slumped posture when sitting alone at his workbench tells us more about his emotional state than pages of dialogue ever could. Even his drinking takes on new meaning in these solitary scenes. What normally appears as casual alcoholism during adventures becomes a visible coping mechanism when Rick is alone. The way he reaches for his flask changes. It becomes less performative and more automatic, a reflexive attempt to numb emotions he doesn't want to process. There's a profound sadness to watching someone so brilliant repeatedly choose chemical detachment rather than emotional vulnerability. The music that accompanies these scenes further enhances their meditative quality. Rather than the show's typical energetic soundtrack, these moments feature subtle ambient tones or complete silence. The absence of audio distractions creates space for reflection, both for Rick and for viewers. This sonic minimalism highlights how much of Rick's typical behavior is noise, literal and figurative, designed to drown out deeper thoughts and feelings. When experienced as a sleep aid, these collected moments of Rick's vulnerability create an unexpectedly soothing progression. Rather than the chaotic stimulation of his adventures, these scenes offer a rhythmic emotional ebb and flow. The consistent pattern, Rick's defenses rising, then gradually falling when alone, creates a predictable emotional cadence that paradoxically becomes relaxing despite the character's inner turmoil. Those private moments of vulnerability take on new meaning when we examine how Rick's relationship with Morty has evolved over time. What started as Rick literally using his grandson as a human shield, a walking brainwave camouflage device, somehow transforms into something neither character could have anticipated. The question isn't whether Rick cares about Morty anymore, it's how much he's willing to admit it. In the earliest episodes, Rick makes no attempt to hide the transactional nature of their relationship. He explicitly tells Morty that his brainwaves perfectly complement Rick's genius brainwaves, essentially canceling them out and making Rick undetectable to his enemies. It's a cold, calculated arrangement where Morty serves as little more than a biological cloaking device. These early adventures establish a pattern where Rick constantly reminds Morty of his disposability, treating him as a tool rather than a person deserving of respect or care. But something fascinating happens as we experience these adventures in a more relaxed format. We notice the subtle shifts that occur between these harsh statements. Even as Rick verbally diminishes Morty's worth, his actions begin to tell a different story. The growing frequency with which Rick puts himself at risk to protect Morty creates a fascinating contradiction. For someone who insists that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, Rick repeatedly acts as though Morty's safety matters tremendously. This evolution becomes particularly evident when we isolate the calmer moments between adventures. Listen to how Rick speaks to Morty in Season 1 compared to more recent seasons. The constant stream of insults gradually becomes punctuated by moments of genuine guidance. There's still plenty of belittlement. Rick's fundamental personality doesn't change, but it's now interspersed with occasional praise and even vulnerability. These quieter exchanges reveal a relationship that has evolved beyond its utilitarian origins. The Rickshank redemption episode adds another layer of complexity to their bond. While Rick's stated origin story may be fabricated, his growing emotional connection to Morty becomes increasingly difficult to deny. The fabrications themselves become interesting when viewed as sleep content. They raise questions about which elements Rick needs to hide, and which ones contain emotional truth even when the details are altered. Even in his deceptions, Rick reveals pieces of genuine attachment. What makes this relationship evolution particularly soothing when experienced as a sleep aid is its gradual, non-linear progression. Rick repeatedly pulls away when he feels himself growing too attached to Morty, creating a rhythm of connection and withdrawal that mirrors the natural ebb and flow of consciousness as we drift toward sleep. Rick's resistance to his own emotional growth creates a tension that paradoxically becomes relaxing when experienced at a slower pace. Their interdimensional adventures create a unique bonding experience, unlike typical family relationships. No grandfather and grandson have shared the specific trauma of abandoning their original dimension after catastrophically transforming everyone into mutants. No traditional mentor and student have experienced the perspective-altering reality of witnessing infinite parallel versions of themselves. These shared experiences forge a connection that transcends conventional family dynamics. The sleep-inducing quality of this relationship evolution comes from its predictable unpredictability. We know Rick will resist emotional growth, yet we also know it will happen despite his resistance. This pattern creates a comforting rhythm when experienced as a relaxation aid. Rick pushes Morty away, circumstances force them together. Rick makes a choice that reveals his care, then immediately covers it with cynicism. The consistency of this pattern becomes oddly soothing. What's particularly striking is how Rick's manner of speaking to Morty transforms across seasons. Early episodes feature Rick barely completing a sentence without belittling his grandson. The constant stream of "you're an idiot, Morty," and "you wouldn't understand this, Morty," establishes their power dynamic clearly. But pay attention to later seasons, where genuine moments of mentorship emerge between the insults. Rick still maintains his abrasive personality, but occasionally allows himself to provide actual guidance rather than just commands. The moments where Rick risks everything to save Morty from danger become increasingly frequent and significant. What begins as reluctant protection evolves into decisive action that contradicts everything Rick claims to believe about attachment and the meaninglessness of existence. These rescue moments take on new significance when strung together in a relaxing compilation. They reveal a through line of growth that might be missed when watching episodes in isolation. Their interdimensional bond is solidified through shared cosmic trauma. No other relationship in the show encompasses the specific experience of witnessing infinite realities together. This shared perspective creates a connection that doesn't need explicit acknowledgement to be powerful. Rick may resist admitting his attachment, but the frequency with which he chooses Morty as his companion speaks volumes about the relationship's importance. Witnessing infinite realities hasn't just shaped Rick and Morty's relationship, it's completely transformed how they view existence itself. What if the most disturbing aspect of Rick's nihilistic worldview, that nothing we do matters in an infinite multiverse, is actually the most soothing concept to fall asleep to? When we strip away the chaotic presentation and focus on the core philosophy, Rick's cosmic perspective transforms from existential dread into something surprisingly comforting. The beauty of Rick's multiverse philosophy lies in its paradoxical nature. While initially presented as a reason for Rick's destructive behavior, the concept that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse takes on an entirely different quality when considered as a release from everyday anxieties. Think about it. How many nights have you lost sleep worrying about a job interview, a relationship problem, or some embarrassing moment? Rick's understanding suggests these worries dissolve in the grand scheme of infinite realities, creating a mental framework that actually helps quiet racing thoughts rather than amplify them. In the episode Morty Night Run, we find one of these hidden philosophical gems. Rick provides a surprisingly calm explanation of how consciousness operates across dimensions. When isolated from the episode's typical frantic energy, this quiet breakdown of consciousness becomes almost meditative. His scientific explanation, typically used to justify dimension-hopping adventures, transforms into a contemplative exercise about the nature of being when presented in a more soothing context. Rick's perspective on time adds another layer to this existential lullaby. Unlike most characters who view time as strictly linear, Rick understands it as flexible and relative. This non-linear perspective naturally reduces the urgency of daily life. If time itself isn't a straight line, then tomorrow's deadline or next week's problem loses its immediate pressure. This understanding parallels meditation practices that encourage focusing on the present moment rather than worrying about the past or fretting about the future. When adapting this perspective for sleep, it creates the perfect mental state for transitioning from wakefulness to rest. The show frequently explores the concept of consciousness transferring between bodies, particularly when Rick switches bodies with other beings. When these sequences are slowed down and presented with a calmer narration, they raise fascinating questions about identity that become contemplative rather than unsettling. What makes you you? Is it your physical body, your memories, or something more ineffable? These questions mirror ancient philosophical inquiries that have been used in meditative practices for centuries. There's something particularly soothing about Rick's explanations of parallel realities when they're extracted from their typically chaotic context. The way he breaks down the concept creates a mental exercise remarkably similar to guided meditation techniques. As you listen to descriptions of infinite possibilities branching outward, your mind naturally expands beyond immediate concerns. This mental expansion mirrors the expanding awareness technique used in many sleep meditation practices. Creator commentary on the philosophical underpinnings of the show reinforces this idea. The writers have noted that Rick's nihilistic worldview can be oddly comforting, as it suggests that life's pressures are alleviated by the understanding that nothing ultimately matters. This isn't a depressing conclusion, but a liberating one, especially when you're trying to quiet an anxious mind before sleep. The key transformation happens when we separate Rick's philosophical insights from his chaotic actions. His understanding of the universe remains profound even when we remove the laser guns and alien battles. Think about lying in bed, eyes closed, considering that somewhere across infinite realities, every possible version of tomorrow exists simultaneously. There's something inherently peaceful about that perspective. It removes the burden of trying to control outcomes that are, in many ways, beyond our control. What makes these concepts particularly effective as sleep aids is how they gradually detach you from immediate concerns. Just as meditation guides often encourage practitioners to observe their thoughts without attachment, Rick's multiverse philosophy creates a framework for seeing your daily problems as small pieces of an infinite cosmic puzzle. Your presentation tomorrow? In infinite realities, it's already happened in every possible way. That argument you had? Across the multiverse, it's resolved in countless variations. This perspective doesn't eliminate responsibility, but it does create emotional distance from anxieties that might otherwise keep you awake. The malleability of consciousness, as explained in Rick's quieter moments, offers another avenue for relaxation. When he explains how consciousness can shift and transfer, it creates a mental framework for letting go of rigid self-identification, another key component of meditative practices designed to promote relaxation. If consciousness itself is flexible, then perhaps our attachment to certain thoughts and worries can be loosened as well. For anyone who's ever used guided meditation or ASMR to fall asleep, these philosophical elements provide a uniquely engaging alternative. Rather than generic visualizations, Rick's universe offers complex philosophical concepts that occupy the mind just enough to prevent rumination while gradually easing you towards sleep. The multiverse becomes less of a sci-fi plot device and more of a mental landscape to explore as consciousness fades. As consciousness drifts through the multiverse of sleep, the loudest character in animation reveals himself most honestly and whispers. The adventures where Rick barely raises his voice often contain his most profound revelations. Those rare moments where the smartest man in the universe admits there are still things that leave him in awe. Behind the portal gun blasts and frenetic spaceship chases lies a different side of Rick Sanchez, one that emerges in the quieter corners of the cosmos. While fans might immediately recall the chaotic adventures featuring screaming heads and gelatinous aliens, it's actually in the show's most serene moments that Rick's character achieves its greatest depth. The Ricklantis mix-up offers some of the most visually stunning sequences in the series, but not for the reasons you might expect. Rather than showcasing Rick's scientific genius through elaborate inventions, these scenes highlight something far more intimate: his genuine appreciation for cosmic beauty. As Rick and Morty travel through space, the animation lingers on spectacular nebulae and star formations, and Rick's usual frantic energy gives way to quiet contemplation. These scenes aren't just beautiful backdrops. They're windows into a Rick who still finds wonder in the universe, despite having seen more of it than perhaps any other human. This softer side of Rick appears again in A Wrinkle in Time, where the adventure takes an unexpected turn toward tranquility. On a planet where time flows differently, Rick and Morty pause their typical rush from danger to simply observe alien sunsets together. What makes this moment remarkable isn't just the visual beauty, but Rick's willingness to stop and experience it. For a character who typically treats the universe as a playground for his scientific conquests, these moments of pure aesthetic appreciation reveal that beneath the cynicism lies someone who still feels connected to the cosmic wonder around him. Even Rick's scientific explanations transform in these quieter settings. When the pace slows down and danger isn't imminent, his explanations to Morty about natural phenomena take on a different quality. The sarcasm evaporates, replaced by a genuine desire to share knowledge rather than assert his intellectual superiority. These moments suggest that Rick's true passion isn't demonstrating how much smarter he is than everyone else, but rather sharing the wonders of the universe with someone who might appreciate them. The educational aspect of their relationship shines brightest, not during chaotic adventures, but in these peaceful interludes where teaching becomes an act of connection rather than condescension. Perhaps one of the most revealing quiet adventures occurs in The Old Man in the Seat, which introduces viewers to Rick's private sanctuary. This secret location serves as more than just a hideaway. It's a rare acknowledgement that even Rick Sanchez, with all his bravado and seeming indifference to others' opinions, needs space for contemplative solitude. This episode peels back layers of Rick's carefully constructed exterior to reveal something surprisingly relatable: a person who requires time alone to process his thoughts and emotions. In a character often defined by his interactions with others and his outward displays of brilliance, this need for privacy humanizes him in ways that high-octane adventures never could. Creator commentary has emphasized this intentional balance between chaos and contemplation in the series. The writers have noted that these quieter adventures often reveal more about Rick's character than episodes filled with laser fights and explosions. This approach creates deeper emotional resonance, allowing viewers to connect with Rick beyond his scientific achievements and witty one-liners. When experienced as a relaxation aid, these contemplative scenes create a rhythm that mimics the natural winding down of consciousness before sleep. What's particularly fascinating about these peaceful explorations is how they often contain Rick's most honest admissions about his own limitations and regrets. When the universe slows down around him, Rick occasionally allows his guard to drop, acknowledging uncertainties and vulnerabilities that would never surface during more intense situations. These admissions create a stark contrast to his typical persona, where certainty and confidence define every action. In quiet moments, we glimpse a Rick who understands that even with all his knowledge, some questions remain unanswerable and some wounds unhealable. The setting of these gentler adventures matters significantly. Planets with unusual natural phenomena, quiet corners of space, and unexplored dimensions that don't immediately threaten their lives all provide backdrops where Rick can temporarily set aside his defensive cynicism. Without immediate danger forcing quick decisions and quicker escapes, Rick's interactions with both the universe and his grandson take on a more thoughtful quality. These settings allow the relationship between Rick and Morty to breathe and develop nuances that would be impossible during their more frantic escapes. What makes these scenes particularly effective for relaxation is their pacing. Unlike the rapid-fire dialogue and quick cuts that characterize much of the series, these quieter adventures linger on moments, allowing both the characters and viewers to absorb the experience. The animation style often shifts subtly during these sequences, with more fluid movements and softer color palettes that enhance the calming effect. When compiled together, these scenes create a hypnotic rhythm that gently guides viewers towards sleep, rather than jolting them with constant stimulation. The contrast between these contemplative adventures and Rick's typical chaos serves an important narrative purpose beyond just providing variety. They remind viewers that even the most frenetic minds require moments of peace. That constant stimulation eventually exhausts rather than enlightens. For a character who often seems to run from emotion through constant activity, these quiet interludes reveal that even Rick cannot escape the human need for reflection and wonder. Behind the visuals of Rick and Morty's universe lies a hidden dimension that might be doing the heaviest emotional lifting: the soundtrack. What we often overlook is how the music completely transforms our experience of Rick's world, turning chaos into contemplation with just a change in melody. The sonic landscape created by composer Ryan Elder contains surprisingly beautiful and contemplative pieces that frequently get overshadowed by the show's frenetic pacing and wild adventures. Music in Rick and Morty isn't just background noise, it's a storytelling tool that fundamentally alters how we experience the show's most significant moments. Take one of the series' most emotionally devastating scenes, Rick's attempted suicide in autoerotic assimilation. The scene itself is visually simple. Rick returning to his garage lab after being abandoned by Unity, preparing a complex device, and nearly ending his life. But what elevates this moment from merely sad to profoundly moving is the perfect musical pairing of Chaos's Do You Feel It? The melancholy melody transforms what could have been just another dark joke into one of the most human moments in the entire series. This musical transformation works in both directions. The haunting For the Damaged Coda by Blonde Redhead first appears during Evil Morty's reveal, creating an immediate sense of dread and malevolence. But when isolated from its villainous context, this same composition becomes something entirely different. A hauntingly beautiful piece that can actually enhance relaxation rather than tension. The piano notes create a hypnotic quality that, when separated from the show's dramatic context, takes on an almost lullaby-like quality. What's fascinating about the show's musical design is how it creates different emotional pathways through the same content. The garage scenes where Rick works alone offer a perfect example of this principle. These moments feature subtle, ambient compositions that most viewers barely register during normal viewing. But when we focus specifically on these quieter interludes and their musical accompaniment, an entirely new experience emerges. The gentle electronic tones and minimal instrumentation create a meditative atmosphere that completely transforms Rick's character from manic scientist to contemplative philosopher. The transformation doesn't just happen through music alone. It's the combination of adjusted pacing and thoughtful scoring that creates this calming effect. When scenes are slowed slightly and paired with the right musical accompaniment, even the most frantic moments in Rick and Morty can become gentle contemplation. This technique allows viewers to engage with the emotional undercurrents rather than just the surface-level chaos that initially draws attention. The musical architecture transforms scientific madness into sonic serenity. What makes this musical? Transformation especially effective is how it reveals emotional depths that might otherwise remain hidden. The show's creators clearly understand this power. Commentary tracks reveal how changing just the music and pacing can significantly alter the emotional impact of scenes, making them more suitable for a calming experience. A frenetic space battle becomes a cosmic ballet when slowed down and rescored. A heated argument transforms into a thoughtful exchange when the background music shifts from tense to ambient. The ambient music choices throughout the series deserve special attention. In many of Rick's quieter moments, we hear subtle electronic compositions that seem to mirror his internal state. Complex yet beautiful, chaotic yet containing patterns. These ambient pieces often incorporate sounds that mimic cosmic phenomena. Electronic tones that evoke the vast emptiness of space. Subtle percussion that suggests the rhythm of distant planets. Synthesizer pads that create the feeling of floating. Even the most iconic Rick and Morty musical moments take on new meaning when experienced in this transformed context. The well-known Goodbye Moon Men sequence from Morty Night Run is typically remembered for its psychedelic visuals and comedic lyrics. But when we focus on just the melodic structure and instrumental backing, it becomes a genuinely beautiful cosmic lullaby. The same applies to Get Swifty. Beneath its deliberately ridiculous lyrics lies a surprisingly hypnotic beat structure that, when isolated, creates a meditative rhythm. This musical transformation extends to scenes of wonder as well as melancholy. When Rick and Morty encounter beautiful cosmic phenomena, Elder's score often shifts to expansive, reverb-heavy compositions that emphasize the vastness of space. These musical moments encourage a sense of awe rather than anxiety, creating perfect transitions for relaxation. The sonic elements don't just complement the visuals. In many cases, they completely recontextualize them. A scene that might initially read as tense or even threatening can become peaceful and contemplative with the right musical backdrop. This is particularly evident in moments where Rick explains complex scientific concepts. With frenetic music, these explanations feel overwhelming and chaotic. But when paired with ambient compositions, the same explanations become almost like scientific bedtime stories. complex yet soothing in their rhythmic delivery. What's remarkable about the show's soundtrack is how it can stand independently from the visuals. Many of Elder's compositions work beautifully as standalone pieces for relaxation or focus, divorced entirely from their animated context. This separability allows the music to create an entirely new experience from familiar content, transforming a show known for its intensity into something that can actually help viewers transition to sleep. Beyond the frantic adventures and scientific breakthroughs, there's something even more improbable unfolding in Rick's universe: his gradual, often reluctant journey toward genuine family connection. While he can travel between dimensions with ease, Rick's most challenging expedition might be the emotional path back to his family. The most revealing aspect of Rick's character isn't found in his adventures with Morty, but in the quieter moments with Beth, Summer, and yes, even Jerry. These family bonds expose vulnerabilities that his scientific genius typically shields from view. In the calm between interdimensional crises, we glimpse a man whose emotional armor has hairline fractures, ones that widen ever so slightly with each passing season. Rick's relationship with Beth reveals layers of complexity that his other interactions simply don't capture. Having abandoned her during childhood, Rick created a relationship dynamic that's both fragile and fascinating. Despite his apparent disinterest in emotional validation, Rick quietly seeks Beth's approval while maintaining the facade that he doesn't need it. This contradiction forms the emotional core of their relationship: a father wanting connection but fearing the vulnerability it requires. The father-daughter relationship takes an even more complicated turn with the Beth clone storyline. When faced with Beth's desire to explore the universe, Rick creates a clone, rather than making a definitive choice about which Beth should stay with the family. This scientific solution to an emotional dilemma perfectly encapsulates Rick's character. He's simultaneously avoiding an emotional decision while also showing a deep desire not to hurt his daughter. The clone situation highlights Rick's struggle with attachment and responsibility, revealing how even the smartest man in the universe can be paralyzed by emotional choices. Family dinner scenes throughout the series serve as perfect barometers for Rick's reluctant integration into family life. These ordinary moments, when viewed chronologically, reveal Rick's gradual shift from complete detachment to occasional participation. What begins as Rick barely tolerating these gatherings evolves into him sometimes initiating conversations or even preparing meals. His physical positioning at the table changes too, initially sitting as far from Jerry as possible to eventually accepting a more central position within the family configuration. Summer's relationship with Rick undergoes perhaps the most noticeable transformation across the series. In early episodes, Rick barely acknowledges her existence, dismissing her as unworthy of his attention or adventures. But as the series progresses, we witness Summer earning Rick's respect through her resilience and intelligence. Her evolution from ignored teenager to occasional adventure partner demonstrates Rick's capacity for reassessment and growth. The moments when Rick invites Summer along on adventures that were previously reserved for Morty signal a significant expansion of his emotional circle. Even with Jerry, Rick's perennial antagonist, we see subtle changes that hint at character development. Their relationship begins with open hostility and contempt, particularly from Rick's side. Yet in later seasons, moments of grudging acceptance emerge between them. Rick occasionally defends Jerry or acknowledges his rare moments of competence, suggesting a slow thawing in their icy relationship. These small concessions from Rick are actually significant character moments. He's learning to tolerate someone he fundamentally disagrees with for the sake of family harmony. What makes these family dynamics so captivating is how they reveal aspects of Rick's character that remain hidden during his scientific exploits. In his laboratory, Rick maintains complete control, but family relationships force him into situations where his genius can't easily solve problems. When Beth seeks his approval or Summer demands inclusion, Rick can't simply portal away from the emotional complexity, at least not without consequences he's increasingly unwilling to accept. The most profound moments often come when Rick shows vulnerability with family members besides Morty. When he examines old family photographs, his typical bravado temporarily falls away, revealing a man who carries the weight of his past choices. These quiet reflections contrast sharply with his usual persona, suggesting that beneath the cynical exterior lies someone who understands the value of family connection, even if he struggles to embrace it. Creator commentary emphasizes that these family relationships weren't afterthoughts but essential components of Rick's character development. These interactions reveal dimensions of Rick that his adventures with Morty simply cannot, showcasing how family serves as both his emotional kryptonite and his potential salvation. The domestic setting forces Rick to confront the very human connections he pretends to dismiss as meaningless in an infinite multiverse. What's particularly soothing about watching these family dynamics unfold is the subtle, gradual nature of the character development. There are no dramatic declarations of love or sudden personality transformations, just small, almost imperceptible shifts in behavior over time. Rick never completely abandons his caustic nature or fully embraces conventional family values, but the trajectory is clear. He's slowly, reluctantly moving toward connection rather than isolation. The most emotionally resonant family interactions don't feature Rick saving the day with science, but rather Rick simply showing up, being present at a family dinner, listening to Beth's concerns, or acknowledging Summer's capabilities. These quiet moments of vulnerability with Beth, his increasing acceptance of Summer's role in his life, and even his evolving tolerance of Jerry demonstrate emotional growth more profound than any scientific achievement. Those quiet family moments reveal one side of Rick, but what about the man himself when nobody's watching? In a universe where characters typically evolve through dramatic arcs and emotional revelations, Rick's development follows a different pattern, one that contradicts everything he claims to believe. His drinking habits, workspace decorations, and responses to failure all tell a story that Rick himself would probably deny ever happening. When we really pay attention to Rick across multiple viewings, we notice his relationship with alcohol subtly evolves throughout the series. In those early episodes, that flask is practically an extension of his arm, a constant companion he turns to whenever emotions threaten to surface. But as we progress through the series, there's a noticeable shift. The flask makes fewer appearances, and when it does, it's less of a desperate crutch and more of an occasional habit. This isn't just an animation inconsistency or the writers forgetting about a character trait. It's a deliberate breadcrumb tracking Rick's changing relationship with emotional escapism. Another subtle marker of Rick's evolution hides in his dialogue patterns across seasons. Early Rick casually drops suicide references with alarming frequency, treating the concept of ending his existence as just another punchline. But keen viewers might notice these mentions gradually tapering off in later seasons. It's not that the show becomes less dark. Rather, Rick seems to be finding new ways to process his existential pain. This shift suggests a man who's slowly, reluctantly discovering reasons to continue existing, despite his claimed belief that nothing matters. The physical space of Rick's garage laboratory tells its own quiet story of character development. In early episodes, this workspace is clinically sterile. All science, no sentiment. But pay close attention to the background details as seasons progress. Family photos start appearing on workbenches. Mementos from adventures with Morty. And Summer find permanent homes on shelves. Small tokens of family connection gradually populate a space that was once defined by emotional detachment. For a man who loudly proclaims his disdain for sentimental attachments, Rick's workspace betrays a very different internal reality. Rick's participation in family traditions provides another window into his subtle evolution. Though he never stops verbally complaining about these activities, his physical presence at family gatherings becomes more consistent over time. Early Rick would fabricate elaborate excuses to escape family dinners or holiday celebrations, but later seasons show him regularly at the table, still grumbling but present nonetheless. The complaints become more performative than genuine, a way to maintain his carefully cultivated image while still satisfying his growing need for family connection. Perhaps most revealing is the transformation in how Rick handles failure. The Rick we meet in early episodes responds to failures with absolute denial. Nobody can prove he was wrong if he refuses to acknowledge it. But as the series progresses, we catch glimpses of a different response pattern emerging. When his inventions backfire or his plans collapse, moments of genuine reflection occasionally break through his defensive shell. These aren't dramatic soul-searching monologues. They're subtle shifts in expression, brief pauses before deflecting with humor, or small acknowledgments that perhaps he doesn't have all the answers. For a character defined by his superior intellect, these small concessions represent significant emotional growth. What makes these developmental breadcrumbs so easy to miss is that Rick never announces them. There's no very special episode where Rick declares he's turning over a new leaf. Instead, the show's writers intentionally crafted these subtle moments of evolution to accumulate gradually over time. This approach mimics actual human growth. Not dramatic transformations, but small adjustments that collectively reveal significant change when viewed across a longer timeline. The contrast between Rick's stated nihilism and his actual behavior becomes increasingly apparent through these small details. He insists nothing matters, yet his garage fills with family photos. He claims emotions are a chemical weakness, yet he drinks less as his family connections strengthen. He portrays himself as utterly self-sufficient, yet his presence at family gatherings becomes more reliable. The accumulated evidence across seasons paints a portrait of a man slowly, unconsciously undermining his own philosophical stance through his actions. These subtle developmental markers reach beyond just Rick himself. They transform our understanding of the entire show. What initially appears to be a series about chaotic sci-fi adventures gradually reveals itself as a meticulous character study of a brilliant man reluctantly growing beyond his self-imposed emotional limitations. The adventures simply provide the backdrop against which this quieter, more meaningful evolution unfolds. Creator commentary confirms this intentional approach to character development, noting that they deliberately chose to show Rick's growth through easily overlooked moments rather than dramatic character arcs. This creative decision allows the show to maintain its irreverent tone, while still delivering meaningful character development for viewers paying close attention. Behind all those reality-hopping adventures and existential crises, Rick and Morty quietly presents a concept that therapists might actually recommend: the freedom from single timeline thinking. When Rick casually mentions that somewhere in the multiverse, everything works out perfectly, he's not just being scientifically accurate, he's unknowingly offering one of the most powerful anxiety reduction techniques imaginable. The multiverse concept that forms Rick and Morty's narrative backbone does more than generate chaotic adventures. It provides a surprisingly effective framework for relaxation. Think about it. In a world where we often lose sleep over what-if scenarios and roads not taken, the multiverse offers a unique perspective. Every possibility exists simultaneously, which means the pressure of making the right choice dissolves into a much gentler understanding that all choices exist somewhere. This perspective becomes especially powerful when considering life's anxieties. In our daily lives, we often become fixated on singular outcomes. Did I make the right career move? Should I have said something different in that conversation? The multiverse concept gently reminds us that in an infinite cosmos, every version of every decision plays out somewhere. This doesn't mean our choices don't matter, but rather transforms the weight of those choices from crushing to manageable. What makes this particularly effective for sleep is how it addresses one of insomnia's greatest triggers: rumination about past decisions or anxiety about future ones. The multiverse concept encourages a mental state where we can acknowledge our concerns while simultaneously recognizing their place in an infinite spectrum of possibilities. It's remarkably similar to mindfulness meditation techniques that teach us to observe our thoughts without becoming attached to them. The visual representation of the multiverse in Rick and Morty enhances this meditative quality. The show frequently portrays cosmic transitions between realities with swirling galaxies and vibrant color palettes that stimulate visual relaxation. These aren't just aesthetic choices. They create a sensory experience that mimics the expanding awareness many seek through traditional meditation practices. The cosmic imagery provides a visual anchor for contemplating vastness, similar to how meditation practitioners might focus on the breath or a mantra. Rick's ability to navigate between dimensions represents another surprisingly soothing aspect of the show. His portal gun allows instant transportation between realities, symbolizing a freedom from constraints that parallels what many of us seek when trying to fall asleep. Sleep requires us to surrender control and boundaries, something Rick achieves through technology. This symbolism takes on new meaning when viewed as part of a relaxation experience, as the portal transitions become visual metaphors for the mind releasing its grip on waking consciousness. The show's portrayal of nested universes, like the microverse battery containing tiny civilizations, mirrors meditation techniques that focus on expanding and contracting awareness. Just as meditators might visualize themselves as part of ever larger systems from body to community to planet to cosmos, Rick and Morty visualizes this concept literally. The ability to zoom between cosmic scales provides not just comedy, but a framework for contemplating our place in an incomprehensibly vast universe. A perspective that often brings comfort rather than existential dread. This concept pairs particularly well with sleep because it addresses the fundamental challenge of transitioning consciousness. Sleep requires us to let go of the waking mind's tendency to organize experience into neat narratives. The multiverse concept provides a gentle alternative framework, one where the mind can remain active but in a more diffuse, accepting state that more closely resembles pre-sleep consciousness. What's fascinating is how the show presents these concepts through Rick's cynical lens, yet when extracted and experienced in a relaxation context, they transform into something genuinely comforting. The very same multiverse that Rick uses to justify his detachment becomes, for viewers, a source of connection to the infinite. This duality speaks to the show's depth. The same philosophical frameworks can be tools of isolation or integration, depending on how we approach them. The parallel between meditation and the multiverse concept extends to how both practices encourage acceptance. Just as meditation teaches practitioners to acknowledge thoughts without judgment, the multiverse theory suggests a reality where all versions exist simultaneously, removing the need to judge any single timeline as definitively right or wrong. This acceptance creates mental space that's particularly conducive to relaxation. Creator commentary on the philosophical implications suggests that while the show presents these concepts through chaotic storytelling, they contain profound comfort when viewed through a relaxation lens. The writers have acknowledged that the multiverse serves as a backdrop for exploring deeper existential themes, providing viewers the opportunity to find solace in the idea that their struggles represent just one of countless possibilities. The multiverse concept also mirrors certain sleep-focused meditation techniques that use visualization of expanding and infinite spaces. When sleep specialists guide patients through imagining themselves in vast, peaceful environments, they're utilizing the same psychological principle that makes Rick's multiverse explanations so effective as pre-sleep content: the dissolution of boundaries and the expansion of mental space. What makes this particularly effective as sleep content is how the multiverse concept gently shifts our perspective from the urgent to the eternal. Daily concerns that keep us awake at night, deadlines, relationships, uncertainties, take on different proportions when viewed against the backdrop of infinite realities. Not because they don't matter, but because their meaning transforms from singular to multiplicative. We can rest, knowing that somewhere in the multiverse, everything works out perfectly. Moving beyond the comfort of infinite realities, there's something even more fascinating hidden in plain sight throughout the series. The moments when Rick Sanchez actually speaks honestly are so rare and quietly profound that most viewers miss their significance entirely. Yet these brief, whispered truths reveal more about who Rick really is than any interdimensional adventure ever could. When Rick and Morty find themselves in quiet corners of the universe, away from the chaos of their typical escapades, we occasionally witness a completely different side of the self-proclaimed smartest man in the universe. In these moments, Rick's guard drops just enough to offer glimpses into the wounded, experienced human beneath all that scientific brilliance. Take the conversation in Rick Potion number 9, where Rick shares his perspective on love with Morty. What makes this exchange particularly meaningful isn't just what Rick says, but how he says it. His cynicism about relationships doesn't come across as the calculated barbs we're accustomed to, but rather as the weary advice of someone who's been deeply hurt. The show brilliantly positions this as more than just Rick being callous. It's Rick speaking from painful experience, revealing that his emotional armor was constructed through genuine suffering rather than inherent misanthropy. These moments acquire an almost meditative quality when experienced in sequence. When Rick admits his failures as a father to Beth, we witness a rare alignment between his internal awareness and external expression. Unlike his typical deflections through humor or scientific jargon, these admissions display a self-awareness that completely contradicts the arrogant persona he works so hard to maintain. The vulnerability in these father-daughter conversations creates a rhythm of honesty that feels especially conducive to relaxation. What's particularly striking about these moments is their deliberate simplicity. When speaking with Bird Person, Rick often strips away the complex scientific terminology that typically characterizes his dialogue. These conversations reveal Rick's deeper philosophical outlook on life and relationships in language that feels more accessible and genuine. Without the protective barrier of scientific complexity, Rick's thoughts emerge in a more relatable form, creating an intimate connection with the viewer that's perfect for a pre-sleep state of mind. The subtle emotional resonance of these exchanges offers something unique in animation: quiet moments of authentic human connection. Creator commentary has emphasized the importance of writing these honest moments precisely because they provide essential contrast to Rick's chaotic behavior. These scenes aren't just character development, they're carefully crafted to reveal the layers that make Rick more than just a mad scientist archetype. Every rare instance where Rick acknowledges the consequences of his lifestyle serves as a window into his internal world. When he explains to Summer why he and Morty had to switch dimensions, leaving their original reality behind, he demonstrates an awareness of the psychological toll his choices have on his family. This willingness to acknowledge the darker aspects of his interdimensional lifestyle stands in stark contrast to his typical dismissal of emotional consequences. These conversations also reveal something profoundly human about Rick: his awareness of how his choices affect others, even when he pretends not to care. His discussions with family members about the impacts of his actions show a man who isn't oblivious to the harm he causes, but rather someone who's painfully aware yet struggles to change his patterns. This internal conflict between awareness and action creates a complexity that resonates on a deeper level than his scientific achievements ever could. What makes these moments particularly suited for relaxation is their pacing. Unlike the rapid-fire dialogue of Rick's adventures, these honest conversations unfold at a gentler tempo. Words are carefully chosen, pauses are meaningful, and emotional weight is given room to breathe. The rhythm of these exchanges mimics the gradual slowing of consciousness as we transition towards sleep. The power of these moments lies in their authenticity. When Rick speaks from experience rather than intellect, we witness a version of him that feels genuinely vulnerable. His philosophical musings with Bird Person about what it means to be alive aren't dressed up in sci-fi terminology. They're straightforward expressions of a man grappling with existence. This stripped-down honesty creates an emotional intimacy that's perfect for winding down at the end of the day. These conversations also form a fascinating chronological progression when viewed as a collection. Early honest moments reveal a Rick who can barely acknowledge his own emotions, while later conversations show incremental growth in his ability to express genuine feelings. This subtle evolution becomes apparent only when these scattered moments are brought together, creating a narrative of emotional development that's easily missed during regular viewing. What's especially compelling about these quiet exchanges is how they recontextualize Rick's adventures. When we hear Rick explain his motivations or reflect on consequences in these honest moments, it transforms our understanding of his actions in previous episodes. Behaviors that seemed purely chaotic take on new meaning when we understand the emotional undercurrents driving them. This layered understanding creates a richer viewing experience, particularly when approached from a relaxation perspective. The rarity of these moments makes them precious within the series. Unlike the consistent character development we might expect from traditional narratives, Rick's moments of honesty appear like rare constellations against the night sky of his adventures. Beautiful, meaningful, and worth staying awake to witness, yet ultimately conducive to a peaceful transition into sleep. While Rick's honest conversations shine like distant stars, there's a black hole at the center of his emotional universe that pulls everything into its orbit. The absence of Diane Sanchez might be the least discussed yet most important element of the entire series, transforming what seems like scientific madness into something far more recognizable. A brilliant man desperately trying to outrun his pain through any distraction possible. When we watch Rick and Morty during normal viewing hours, it's easy to get caught up in the interdimensional cable, the pickle transformations, and the elaborate sci-fi concepts. But in those quiet moments before sleep, when our defenses are down, the show reveals its true emotional core. A Cronenberg disaster or an intergalactic federation isn't just exciting storytelling. It's the elaborate architecture Rick builds to avoid confronting his own grief. What's fascinating about Rick's relationship with his deceased wife is how it influences virtually every aspect of his character without being explicitly discussed. The way he avoids forming attachments, his persistent cynicism about love, his scientific obsession. These aren't just character traits, they're symptoms of profound loss. We rarely hear Diane mentioned by name, but her absence echoes through Rick's actions like a ghost that haunts not just one house, but an entire multiverse. Rick's scientific brilliance takes on a completely different meaning when viewed as an emotional coping mechanism. His ability to travel between dimensions isn't just a cool superpower. It's his way of escaping a reality where someone he loved is permanently gone. Think about it. A man who can literally do anything, go anywhere, and create any reality he wants. Yet he never uses that power to bring back the one person he truly loved. That's not just sci-fi storytelling. That's a profound meditation on the acceptance of loss. The way Rick processes grief through scientific distraction reveals something deeply human beneath all that superhuman intellect. When most people face emotional pain, they might throw themselves into work or hobbies. Rick throws himself into creating microverses, battling galactic federations, and turning himself into various objects. The ultimate workaholic escapism, just with higher stakes and cooler gadgets. This emotional undercurrent creates a through line that transforms seemingly disconnected adventures into a coherent character study. Once you recognize that Rick's behavior stems from this place of loss, even the most chaotic episodes gain new meaning. His reckless behavior isn't just entertaining. It's a man desperately trying to feel anything other than the pain he's carrying. His tendency to push away those who care about him illustrates his struggle with grief and the fear of losing loved ones again. The show balances its humor and sci-fi concepts with this profound emotional depth. While on the surface it might seem like a show about cool gadgets and interdimensional travel, underneath it's exploring complex themes of love, loss, and the human experience. When experienced in a relaxed state, these themes become more apparent, creating a surprisingly meditative experience. The most powerful aspect of Rick's emotional journey is how relatable it becomes once we strip away the sci-fi elements. Strip away the portal gun, the spaceship, and the genius IQ, and what's left is simply a wounded person afraid to connect. That's something anyone who's experienced loss can understand. Rick's inability to process his grief in healthy ways, despite having access to literally infinite possibilities, shows that emotional growth doesn't come from external solutions but from internal acceptance. We see this emotional truth reinforced in episodes where Rick's defenses momentarily fall. In these rare moments of vulnerability, we don't see the smartest man in the universe. We see someone struggling with very human pain. These glimpses humanize Rick in ways that transform him from a cartoonish mad scientist into someone whose suffering feels authentic and poignant. What makes these emotional elements so perfect for relaxation viewing is how they provide depth without demanding intense engagement. Unlike the show's complex sci-fi concepts that might require mental gymnastics to follow, these emotional threads can be experienced passively, washing over you like gentle waves, rather than crashing like the typical Rick and Morty tsunami of information. The creators of the show are clearly aware of this emotional foundation. Commentary tracks reveal that while the show is primarily known for its humor and sci-fi concepts, these emotional elements were deliberately included to give the series staying power beyond its jokes and entertainment value. The ability to balance chaotic comedy with genuine emotion is what elevates Rick and Morty above other adult animation shows. Even when Rick is at his most scientifically brilliant, solving impossible problems or creating mind-bending technologies, There's always a hint that this genius serves as a defense against confronting his emotional vulnerabilities. His intellectual superiority becomes not just a character trait, but a shield, the ultimate defense mechanism for a man who's experienced a loss too painful to process directly. This reframing of Rick's character transforms how we experience the show during relaxation viewing. Scenes that might seem frenetic during regular viewing take on a melancholic beauty when viewed through this emotional lens. His scientific monologues become poignant rather than just impressive. His cynicism becomes tragic rather than just funny. And his rare moments of connection become profoundly moving rather than just character development. Beyond the emotional armor lies something even more profound in Rick's universe: those transcendent moments suspended between realities. Scientists have found that our consciousness doesn't simply switch off when we fall asleep, but transitions through various states, much like Rick's dimensional travel. And the show captures this liminal experience with surprising accuracy that your brain might recognize even as your conscious mind drifts away. The way Rick and Morty float through space in the Ricklantis mix-up isn't just visually appealing, it's neurologically significant. That weightless drifting mirrors what happens in our brains during sleep onset. As we watch Rick and Morty suspended in the cosmos, our minds begin to mimic that same untethered quality. The gentle movements and cosmic backdrop create what sleep scientists might recognize as ideal conditions for transitioning consciousness from wakefulness to sleep. What's fascinating is how these transitional scenes often appear at crucial plot moments. The cosmic floating sequences aren't just pretty visuals. They're deliberately placed at junctures where characters and viewers need processing time. The show's creators seem to instinctively understand that audiences need these breathing spaces between the intense, rapid-fire comedy that dominates most episodes. These moments of cosmic drift serve as mental palate cleansers, allowing our brains to absorb what we've seen while preparing for what comes next. Rick's relationship with the stars themselves reveals another sleep-inducing quality. In several episodes, we see him simply gazing upward, his typical frantic energy temporarily suspended. These stargazing moments tap into something primal in our psychology, the same contemplative state humans have experienced looking at the night sky for thousands of years. What's remarkable is how these scenes strip away Rick's scientific arrogance, leaving only wonder. In these quiet moments, Rick's defensive mechanisms fall away, and we see someone capable of being moved by beauty without needing to analyze or control it. Even more fascinating is how the show portrays consciousness itself. Most science fiction presents consciousness as a binary state. You're either awake or you're not, alive or dead, in this reality or another. But Rick and Morty takes a more sophisticated approach that aligns with modern neuroscience. Consciousness exists on a spectrum with many transitional states, and the show visualizes these transitions through its interdimensional travel sequences. When Rick explains how consciousness works across dimensions, he's offering a framework that perfectly parallels the gradual shift we experience while falling asleep, a progression through increasingly dreamlike states rather than an abrupt switch. The dream sequences throughout the series deserve special attention for their sleep-inducing qualities. Unlike typical TV dreams that announce themselves with wavy visuals or harp music, Rick and Morty's dreams blend seamlessly with reality, creating uncertainty about what's real within the show's universe. This approach mirrors our own experience of hypnagogia, that transitional state where reality and dreams intermingle before sleep fully takes hold. By experiencing these fluid boundaries between states of consciousness through Rick's adventures, viewers are subtly guided toward their own sleep transitions. The show's portrayal of these liminal spaces isn't accidental. Creator commentary highlights how these scenes are designed to evoke wonder and introspection, making them ideal companions for pre-sleep viewing. The weightlessness of space travel scenes perfectly captures that floating sensation as consciousness begins to drift. These sequences offer something rare in television: visual representations of what falling asleep actually feels like from the inside, that gentle loosening of logical thought and physical awareness. It's worth noting that the most effective sleep transition sequences involve minimal dialogue. When Rick and Morty float silently through space, The absence of Rick's typically rapid speech patterns gives viewers a chance to experience the visuals without processing language, mirroring how our analytical functions begin to quiet as sleep approaches. The natural pauses in these scenes allow our own thoughts to gently surface and subside, without the constant stimulation that characterizes most of the show. The transitions between different states of being, whether moving between dimensions or between wakefulness and sleep, create a uniquely soothing narrative flow. These passages offer viewers a chance to practice what sleep experts recommend: the gradual release of conscious control. When Rick steps through a portal, there's a moment of surrender to whatever lies on the other side. Similarly, falling asleep requires us to surrender conscious control and trust the process. By witnessing these transitions repeatedly through Rick's journeys, viewers subconsciously practice the very skill needed for sleep onset. What makes these moments so effective as sleep aids is their combination of the familiar and the novel. Sleep researchers have found that our brains remain partially alert to completely new stimuli, a survival mechanism, but can relax more fully with content that's novel yet within a familiar framework. Rick and Morty's quiet cosmic moments provide exactly this balance: familiar characters in new settings that are interesting enough to hold attention without triggering alertness. The consistent visual language of portals, stars, and floating creates a predictable framework that signals to our brains that it's safe to relax. The beauty of Rick and Morty as a sleep companion lies in this psychological sophistication. While most sleep content relies on simple repetition or monotony, this compilation harnesses the natural rhythms of consciousness transition that our brains already understand. By accompanying Rick through these liminal spaces between wakefulness and other states, viewers are guided along the same neural pathways they naturally traverse while falling asleep. Have you ever noticed how the sound of Rick's portal gun creates this oddly comforting whoosh that signals the beginning of an adventure? There's something almost hypnotic about that distinctive sound. That liquid, electric hum, followed by the splash of neon green that tears through the fabric of reality. It's become such a recognizable audio cue throughout the series that our brains have been conditioned to anticipate something new and exciting whenever we hear it. Let's start our relaxation journey by exploring some of the most whimsical portal openings across the series. These aren't the moments where Rick and Morty are frantically escaping danger or leaping into obvious chaos. We're focusing on those precious seconds where they step through portals with genuine wonder, where possibilities seem endless and threats haven't yet materialized. Think back to episodes like Morty Night Run, where Rick and Morty casually step through a portal to blips and chits, or when they visit the simple but peaceful dimension where pizzas order and eat humans. What makes these portal transitions so uniquely soothing is the brief moment of anticipation they create. There's this beautiful liminal space, not quite here, not quite there, where anything seems possible. The animation team creates this ethereal effect where characters are momentarily suspended between worlds, their outlines briefly distorted as they pass through the portal's membrane. It's a visual representation of that floating sensation we experience just before falling asleep. The signature green glow serves as our visual anchor throughout these transitions. Color psychology research suggests that specific shades of green promote feelings of harmony and balance, which explains why the portal's luminescent emerald tone can feel so calming despite leading to potential chaos. This consistent visual element creates a reliable pattern for our brains to latch onto, a constant amid the ever-changing multiverse. If you listen carefully to these portal scenes, you'll notice how the show's composers use subtle audio design during these moments. There's a layered quality to the portal sound, beginning with an electronic whine that builds to a splash, followed by a gentle ambient hum that persists while the portal remains open. This creates what sound designers call a sonic envelope, a complete audio experience with a beginning, middle, and end that satisfies our brain's desire for auditory structure. One particularly interesting aspect to observe is Morty's evolving relationship with these portal entries. In early episodes, his body language near portals shows clear anxiety, hesitant steps, wide eyes, and nervous glances back at Rick. But as the series progresses, we see his shoulders relax, his stance become more confident, and occasionally even excitement as he approaches these gateways. This transformation mirrors the journey many of us take with relaxation techniques, initially resistant, eventually surrendering to the experience. The portals themselves represent perfect transition points for our relaxation journey. Just as Rick and Morty use them to move between worlds, we can use these moments as mental signposts, opportunities to take a breath, check in with our bodies, and allow our minds to process. Before moving forward, these natural breaks create a rhythm to our relaxation practice, preventing it from becoming one undifferentiated experience. Let's explore some specific portal destinations that create particularly calming visuals. While the show often focuses on chaotic worlds, there are several portal openings that lead to genuinely peaceful settings. Remember the bird world from Get Swifty, Before Things Went Wrong? Those initial scenes featured floating islands with gentle waterfalls against a pastel sky. Or consider the brief glimpse we get of Bird Person's homeworld in Rixie Business, a serene forest planet with ambient nature sounds and minimal movement in the background animation. Even the way characters physically interact with portals contributes to their soothing quality. Unlike doorways, which require deliberate opening and closing, portals allow for a more fluid transition. Characters simply pass through with minimal effort. This effortless quality visually represents the mental state we're trying to achieve, moving from alertness to relaxation without force or struggle. The portals also create a unique lighting effect on the characters as they pass through. Watch how Rick and Morty's faces are briefly illuminated by that green glow, creating a momentary mask-like effect that simplifies their expressions. This reduction of visual complexity gives our eyes a brief rest from processing detailed facial animations, creating another subtle opportunity for relaxation. As we progress through different portal scenes, you'll notice a pattern in how the destinations become increasingly serene. We might start with portals opening to busy locations like the Citadel of Rix, where the background is filled with movement and activity, then gradually transition to quieter worlds. Perhaps Unity's planet after the inhabitants have gone to sleep, or the simple camping dimension from the Rick Churian Morty date, with its expansive starry sky and campfire. The gentle vibration sound that accompanies interdimensional travel becomes our first sleep aid in this journey. Our brains are remarkably adaptive to consistent audio cues, and with enough exposure, they begin to form associations. Just as Pavlov's dogs learn to associate a bell with food, we can train our minds to associate the portal sound with the beginning of rest. This is why so many sleep apps utilize consistent sounds. They become triggers for our relaxation response. Another fascinating detail in these portal scenes is the way time appears to briefly dilate as characters pass through. The animation often slows down just slightly during the transition, creating a micro moment of suspended animation. This subtle effect mirrors what happens to our perception of time as we begin to drift towards sleep. That curious sensation where seconds start to stretch and awareness of time's passage begins to blur. In the universe of Rick and Morty, portals represent infinite possibility, but for our purposes, they represent something equally valuable: the possibility of peace. Each one is an invitation to let go of the current reality and embrace something new. That's essentially what falling asleep is: a willingness to release conscious control and trust in the journey to another state of being. That willingness to release conscious control doesn't just happen through portal travel. It's perfectly captured in those moments when Morty puts on the Roy helmet at Blips and Chits. What seems like a chaotic arcade actually contains some of the show's most meditative sequences, where animation softens, colors become muted, and time unfolds in a way that mirrors our own journey towards sleep. You might think an intergalactic arcade filled with alien creatures and flashing lights would be the last place to find tranquility. But if we look beyond the surface chaos, Blips and Chits offers a surprising sanctuary of rhythmic sounds and dreamlike sequences that can actually guide us toward relaxation. The genius of these arcade scenes lies in their ambient soundscape. Listen closely and you'll notice how the repetitive game sounds create a surprisingly consistent pattern. Those electronic beeps, the mechanical clicks of joysticks, and the distant alien conversations blend together to form something almost like white noise, a gentle audio cushion that helps mask those intrusive thoughts that often keep us awake. It's counterintuitive, But this cacophony functions similarly to those sleep machines that play rainfall or ocean waves. The Roy game sequences deserve special attention. When Morty puts on that helmet and experiences an entire lifetime in minutes, the animation style transforms dramatically. Unlike the sharp lines and quick movements we see elsewhere, Roy's life unfolds with softer edges and a watercolor-like quality. The pacing slows considerably, and we witness life events unfold in a dreamy, unhurried manner that perfectly mirrors the transition from wakefulness to sleep. Have you noticed how the color palette shifts during these sequences? While Blips and Chits itself is a riot of neon and flashing lights, the Roy game employs softer, more muted tones. The animators deliberately tone down the visual stimulation, creating a gentler experience for our eyes. Exactly what we need as we prepare for rest. These subtle visual cues signal to our brains that it's time to downshift from alertness to relaxation. The visual transitions between different arcade games create another soothing element. As the camera pans from one game cabinet to the next, it establishes a predictable visual rhythm. This natural pattern works similarly to traditional sleep aids like counting sheep, giving our minds something simple and repetitive to focus on while the deeper parts of our consciousness begin to unwind. What's fascinating about these Blips and Chits scenes is how they represent a perfect microcosm of the sleep process itself, just as our brains process information differently as we transition from wakefulness to sleep. The arcade creates layers of consciousness. On the surface, there's the physical arcade with its bright lights and alien patrons. One level deeper, there are the games themselves with their own self-contained worlds. And finally, there's the Roy simulation, a complete life experience nested within the game, within the arcade, within the show. This layering creates a natural pathway for our minds to follow as we prepare for sleep. We can start by focusing on the arcade's ambient sounds, allowing those repetitive game noises to become increasingly distant, like waves washing over our consciousness. As we grow more relaxed, we can shift our attention to the visual rhythm of the blinking lights and moving characters. By the time we reach the Roy sequences, we're primed for the deeper state of relaxation that precedes sleep. The dreamlike quality of watching someone else's life unfold gives our minds permission to begin creating those same kinds of connections and associations that form the basis of our own dreams. What makes these gaming moments particularly effective for relaxation is how they exist as pockets of calm within chaos. The contrast between the arcade's frenetic energy and the meditative qualities we've identified creates a perfect metaphor for finding peace, even in life's most hectic moments. We don't need to escape to a silent monastery to find relaxation. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, within experiences we'd never expect to be soothing. Think about how Rick's typically manic energy softens in the arcade. He becomes absorbed in the games, his movements more deliberate, his focus narrowed. This shift in behavior models the very mental state we're trying to achieve: present, engaged, but not hyperactive or anxious. Even in his most cynical moments, Rick finds a kind of peace in the structured play of the arcade, reminding us that our own relaxation doesn't require perfect circumstances. For Morty, the arcade represents one of the few places where he can temporarily set aside his worries. When he's playing Roy, he's not anxious about school or relationships or the next interdimensional catastrophe. He's simply existing in the moment. This mindful presence is exactly what sleep experts recommend for those struggling with insomnia or racing thoughts at bedtime. The gentle repetition of sounds throughout these arcade scenes creates an audio experience that gradually becomes more distant and dreamlike. As your own eyelids grow heavy, those electronic beeps and boops can start to feel like they're coming from further and further away, similar to how external sounds integrate into our dreams as we fall deeper into sleep. Beyond the arcade's electronic hum lies something even more hypnotic: those overlooked moments when Rick's ship drifts silently through the cosmic void. While these quiet travel scenes might seem like mere transitional filler, they're actually some of the most meticulously designed, sleep-inducing sequences in the entire series. When Rick and Morty find themselves between adventures, simply traveling through space, there's a remarkable shift in both visual and audio elements that's worth paying attention to. The ship's interior becomes bathed in deep blues and purples, colors that aren't randomly chosen. These specific hues directly signal to your brain's natural sleep response systems. The lighting design team deliberately uses this cooler end of the color spectrum during these travel sequences, creating a visual environment that mimics the natural darkening of our world as bedtime approaches. Listen closely during these moments, and you'll notice the ship itself provides a constant, gentle hum, essentially creating the perfect white noise machine. This consistent audio backdrop filters out distracting sounds while providing just enough auditory stimulation to keep anxious thoughts at bay. The sound designers have crafted this engine noise to hit specific frequency ranges that research has shown promote relaxation and sleep readiness. What makes these cosmic travel scenes particularly effective for winding down is their pacing. Unlike the frantic adventures that dominate most episodes, these moments embrace stillness. The camera lingers on the vastness of space, occasionally drifting past distant stars and nebulae. This visual experience parallels what makes tools like lava lamps so effective for sleep induction. The slow, unpredictable yet gentle movement captures just enough attention to quiet an overactive mind without demanding full concentration. Notice how Rick and Morty themselves often fall silent during these stretches. Their postures change, shoulders relax, movements become minimal, and their gazes turn contemplative. This physical modeling of relaxation subtly encourages your own body to mirror that same state. When Rick leans back in his seat, staring wordlessly at the stars, or when Morty presses his face against the window in quiet wonder, they're demonstrating the very mindset that precedes healthy sleep. The weightlessness depicted during space travel scenes also serves a fascinating sleep-inducing purpose. As consciousness begins to slip away each night, many people experience that distinctive floating sensation, the feeling that your body is gently drifting in space. By showing characters in a literally weightless environment, these scenes prime your brain to associate that visual with the natural transition into sleep. Your mind begins to replicate the sensation you're observing, creating a feedback loop that accelerates relaxation. The backgrounds in these quiet moments deserve special attention. The show's artists create some of their most breathtaking work in these seemingly simple cosmic backdrops. Swirling galaxies rendered in deep indigos, and violets, accented with distant pinpricks of starlight, create visual depth that draws your eyes deeper into the screen. This gentle pull mimics the way your visual focus naturally softens as sleep approaches. Objects in your field of vision become less distinct as your brain begins prioritizing rest over sharp perception. These space scenes achieve something remarkable for a show known for its frenetic energy. They create legitimate moments of cinematic meditation. When the characters stop talking and simply exist in the vastness of space, viewers are given permission to similarly quiet their own mental chatter. In our hyper-connected world where silence has become increasingly rare, these animated moments of cosmic contemplation provide a template for how to be still with our thoughts. Perhaps most interestingly, the emotional tone of these space travel scenes often reflects a peaceful acceptance of life's complexities. The characters, temporarily freed from immediate danger or adventure, exist in a liminal space where reflection becomes possible. Rick's normally furrowed brow sometimes relaxes, suggesting that even the most anxious minds can find moments of peace. This modeling of emotional regulation serves as a powerful reminder that our own racing thoughts can similarly be tamed as we prepare for sleep. The absence of traditional narrative progression during these scenes also serves a sleep-inducing purpose. Rather than pushing the plot forward with new information that your brain would feel compelled to process and store, these moments simply exist. They allow viewers to momentarily step outside the demands of following a complex story and instead experience a sensory environment optimized for relaxation. What's particularly effective about these cosmic scenes is how the confined space of the ship contrasts with the infinite vastness outside the windows. This visual juxtaposition mirrors our own experience of falling asleep, the physical boundaries of our bodies against the limitless landscape of emerging dreams. The artists emphasize this contrast by frequently showing close-ups of character faces illuminated by starlight, their expressions softening as they gaze outward. Listen carefully and you'll notice the score during these moments often shifts to more ambient compositions. The usual brisk tempo and energetic themes give way to sustained notes and gentle progressions. This musical shift works in perfect harmony with the visual elements to create a multi-sensory experience designed to slow your heart rate and deepen your breathing, the physiological foundations of falling asleep. These cosmic scenes aren't just beautiful to look at. They're strategically crafted to induce a specific mental state. The reduced visual stimulation, consistent ambient sound, cool color palette, and slowed pacing all work together to create the perfect conditions for your conscious mind to begin releasing its grip on wakefulness. Just as Rick's ship drifts effortlessly through the cosmos, your thoughts are encouraged to float freely rather than latch onto worries or plans. The ship lands, but our journey into relaxation continues as we step into the amber-lit sanctuary of Rick's garage. What makes watching Rick's manic, inventive process so paradoxically soothing? The answer lies not in what he's creating, but in the meditative rhythm of creation itself. Rick's garage laboratory isn't just a workshop, it's a sensory retreat disguised as scientific chaos. The warm amber lighting that bathes the space creates an atmosphere more akin to a cozy reading nook than a mad scientist's lair. This warmer color palette stands in stark contrast to the cool tones we experience during space travel, mimicking the comforting glow of a bedside lamp. The visual warmth signals to your brain that you're in a safe space, despite the potentially reality-ending devices under construction. Listen closely to the soundscape of invention. Those soft clinks of metal tools as Rick assembles his latest contraption create a rhythm not unlike rain against a window. The bubbling of mysterious liquids in beakers and test tubes provides a consistent auditory backdrop. A symphony of creation that hits many of the same pleasure centers in our brains that ASMR triggers activate. When Rick offers an occasional satisfied grunt upon completing a particularly challenging component, it serves as a gentle punctuation mark in this unexpected lullaby. These sounds aren't random. They form patterns that our brains subconsciously recognize and anticipate. This predictability is key to relaxation. Your mind can follow along without requiring active engagement. The rhythmic quality of Rick's tinkering mirrors other naturally sleep-inducing sounds like waves crashing or a heartbeat, creating an auditory environment perfectly calibrated for winding down. Watch how the animation style shifts during these workshop scenes. The camera often lingers on Rick's hands as they manipulate tools and components with surprising dexterity. This visual focus creates a mesmerizing effect, similar to watching a pendulum swing or waves rolling onto shore, movements that have been scientifically proven to induce a state of light hypnosis. Your eyes track these repetitive motions, and your brain begins to entrain to their rhythm, gradually easing you towards sleep. What's particularly interesting is the minimal dialogue during these invention sequences. Unlike the rapid-fire banter that characterizes much of the show, garage scenes often feature extended periods where Rick works in focused silence. This reduction in verbal processing allows your brain to slow down, to process information at a more leisurely pace. Without constant dialogue to follow, your conscious mind can begin releasing its tight grip on wakefulness. The consistency of the garage setting throughout the series offers another layer of comfort. No matter how chaotic the multiverse becomes, Rick's workshop remains a constant, cluttered but familiar. This environmental stability provides an anchor point that's essential for deep relaxation. Just as children sleep better in their own beds, our minds find it easier to unwind in spaces we recognize as safe and predictable. There's something profoundly calming about watching someone fully absorbed in their craft. Rick's focused intensity during invention sequences demonstrates a state of flow, complete immersion in a task that's challenging yet achievable. We find vicarious relaxation in observing this flow state, even when the character is building devices that could tear apart reality. The process itself becomes meditative, regardless of the potentially apocalyptic outcomes. This paradox is particularly fascinating. Logic would suggest that watching someone create doomsday devices should trigger anxiety, not relaxation. Yet the opposite occurs because our brains respond more to the immediate sensory experience than to the narrative implications. The methodical assembly process, the consistent sounds, the warm lighting, these tangible elements override any conceptual anxiety about what Rick might be creating. The garage also serves as a physical manifestation of Rick's mind, organized chaos that somehow results in brilliant creation. There's something reassuring about watching someone navigate complexity with confidence. As viewers, we're relieved of the burden of understanding. We can simply observe as Rick makes sense of the incomprehensible, allowing our own thoughts to drift and untangle. Even the animation details support this relaxing experience. Notice how the bubbling liquids in beakers create gentle motion and subtle light reflections across the garage walls. These small, continuous movements provide just enough visual stimulation to hold your attention without demanding it. Your eyes can rest on these subtle animations, neither overstimulated nor bored, the perfect visual state for pre-sleep relaxation. The garage represents a contained environment where chaos is controlled, a powerful metaphor for the sleep process itself. As we drift towards sleep, our brains sort through the chaos of daily experiences, organizing and processing information within the contained environment of our consciousness. Watching Rick do something similar with physical objects models this mental process, perhaps triggering our own brain's readiness to begin its nightly organization. In these workshop scenes, we're invited to be passive observers rather than active participants. This perspective shift is crucial for sleep preparation, the transition from doing to witnessing, from engaging to observing. As Rick handles the complexity, solves the problems, and manages the details, we're free to step back, to breathe more deeply, to let our shoulders drop away from our ears. The emotional tone of these invention sequences often carries a surprising gentleness. Between the cataclysmic adventures and moral dilemmas that drive the show's plot, these garage moments offer a respite where the emotional stakes are temporarily lowered. Rick isn't fighting for his life or confronting existential truths. He's simply building, creating, making sense of materials. This emotional neutrality provides a perfect canvas for our own thoughts to quiet. The garage laboratory scenes demonstrate how focused creation can be, as relaxing to watch as it is to perform. The combination of rhythmic sounds, consistent visual patterns, warm lighting, and minimal dialogue creates an environment optimized for relaxation. As viewers, we're given permission to slow down and observe rather than participate, a crucial shift for those preparing to sleep. While Rick's laboratory offers a meditative sanctuary through calculated chaos, the Smith family kitchen reveals a completely different kind of psychological anchor. Have you noticed how those seemingly ordinary breakfast table scenes scattered throughout Rick and Morty provide such a stark contrast to interdimensional adventures? These moments of domestic routine might actually be the most powerful in signaling to our brains that it's safe to begin the journey towards sleep. The breakfast table represents something fundamentally human amid the show's cosmic insanity. These scenes are animated with a distinctly different approach than the adventure sequences. The animators employ fewer quick cuts and allow for lingering shots that give your eyes permission to rest on simple, recognizable images. This visual stability creates a foundation for your mind to begin unwinding from the day's complexities. Listen carefully to the soundscape of these kitchen scenes. There's a gentle symphony of familiar sounds: the clink of cereal bowls, the pouring of orange juice, the soft scrape of chairs against the floor. These auditory cues create what sleep researchers call comfort sounds, familiar audio patterns that signal safety to our primitive brains. When we hear these mundane domestic noises, our nervous systems naturally begin to downshift from high alert to relaxation. The lighting design in these scenes deserves special attention. Morning sunlight typically filters through the Smith kitchen windows, casting a warm glow that bathes the family in golden light. This isn't just an aesthetic choice. It's a deliberate visual signal that taps into our circadian rhythms. That particular quality of morning light, even when animated, triggers associations with waking up naturally after a good night's sleep, creating a comforting visual loop that prepares us for rest. What's particularly interesting about these breakfast moments is how they function narratively as transitions between more chaotic elements. They serve as emotional anchors throughout the series, offering viewers consistent touchpoints of normality amidst the show's existential madness. This anchoring effect mirrors how our brains process information during the transition to sleep. We need stable reference points to organize our thoughts before surrendering to unconsciousness. Even the family's dysfunctional interactions at the breakfast table offer a strange comfort through their predictability. Jerry will say something oblivious, Beth might respond with passive aggression, Summer will roll her eyes, and Morty will anxiously navigate the family tension. This consistency creates a rhythm that your brain can easily track without requiring full attention, perfect for the winding down process before sleep. These breakfast scenes often represent a return to normalcy after interdimensional catastrophes, creating a narrative pattern that psychologically mirrors how sleep helps us process and reset after our own daily challenges. Just as Rick and Morty must occasionally return to the kitchen table regardless of what cosmic horrors they've witnessed, our minds need to return to baseline through sleep to function properly. The contrast between breakfast scenes and adventure sequences serves another important purpose for relaxation. The breakfast table represents perhaps the most normal setting in a show defined by abnormality. This normalcy creates a psychological safety zone where viewers can temporarily release the cognitive tension required to follow the show's complex sci-fi concepts. Your brain doesn't need to work as hard during these scenes, allowing natural drowsiness to surface. What many viewers don't realize is that these breakfast moments are animated differently from the rest of the show. The domestic scenes feature more subdued visuals with softer movement patterns. Characters tend to sit rather than run, speak rather than shout, and perform simple actions rather than complex ones. This reduction in visual stimulation naturally leads to decreased neural activity in viewers, easing the transition towards sleep. The breakfast table also functions as a physical constant in a show where reality is perpetually in flux. While dimensions may collapse and timelines may fracture, the kitchen remains remarkably consistent across episodes. This environmental stability taps into our evolutionary need for safe spaces, locations where we can lower our defenses without consequence. Sleep researchers have long recognized that consistent sleep environments are crucial for quality rest, and these breakfast scenes provide a similar psychological constant. Consider how these scenes often feature wide framing that captures the entire family at once, rather than the quick cuts between close-ups that characterize more intense sequences. This comprehensive view allows your eyes to settle into the frame rather than constantly adjusting to new visual information. Sleep specialists recognize this visual stability as a key component in preparing the brain for rest. The predictable patterns of family interaction create something similar to what meditation practitioners call a thought anchor, a consistent focal point that allows the mind to settle. As viewers, we know broadly what to expect from these kitchen scenes, freeing our brains from the high alertness required during unpredictable adventure sequences. This predictability creates the perfect conditions for eyelids to grow heavy. It's worth noting how these breakfast moments often appear immediately after the show's most chaotic adventures, creating a deliberate pacing structure that mirrors our own need for recovery after intensity. Just as your heart rate naturally slows after exercise, these kitchen scenes provide a narrative cooldown that guides viewers toward progressively deeper states of relaxation. There's also something powerfully nostalgic about breakfast scenes for many viewers. They tap into universal childhood memories of family meals, creating a subconscious association with safety and care that transcends the show's specific content. This emotional resonance deepens the relaxation response, allowing viewers to connect with their own need for comfort and rest. Even when these breakfast scenes contain the seeds of later conflict, the familiar setting transforms how we process that tension. Rather than triggering alertness, the breakfast table contains these narrative tensions within a framework of safety. Our brains recognize this containment, allowing us to observe developing conflicts with curiosity rather than anxiety, a crucial shift for those preparing to sleep. While the Smith family kitchen grounds us in familiar territory, there's something uniquely tranquil about those rare moments when Rick and Morty simply pause under the night sky together. Beyond the breakfast table's domestic sanctuary lies an entirely different kind of peace. Those fleeting instances when characters abandon their frantic adventures to gaze upward at animated constellations. Have you ever noticed how these quiet, stargazing scenes feel almost designed to guide you into dreamland? What makes these moments so special is how infrequent they are. In a show defined by constant motion and chaotic energy, these stargazing scenes stand as islands of genuine connection, Think about the time Rick and Morty sit on the roof after narrowly escaping yet another universe-ending catastrophe. Or when Summer and Morty share a quiet moment contemplating their cosmic insignificance beneath alien stars. These aren't just narrative pauses. They're carefully crafted respites that mirror our own need for contemplative silence before sleep. The sound design during these moments deserves special attention. Unlike the energetic soundscapes that dominate most of the series, stargazing scenes feature the gentle chirping of crickets, soft night breezes, and distant ambient sounds that create a natural, sleep-inducing environment. These audio elements aren't just background noise. They're carefully calibrated to signal to your brain that it's time to wind down. The rhythm of these soundscapes matches the slower breathing patterns associated with pre-sleep states, effectively guiding your physiological processes toward relaxation. Watch closely and you'll notice something fascinating happening with the animation itself during these quiet moments. The normally frenetic movement that characterizes Rick and Morty slows dramatically, with the animators employing longer holds on character expressions and fewer rapid transitions. This visual deceleration serves a dual purpose. It reflects the character's temporary escape from chaos, while simultaneously allowing your own visual processing systems to downshift. Your eyes don't have to work as hard to track motion, creating a physiological response that mirrors the onset of drowsiness. The color palette transforms during these scenes as well. The animation team employs deeper blues and purples that dominate the frame, creating a visual environment that works in harmony with your body's natural chemistry. These cooler tones actually trigger melatonin production, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep cycles. What appears as a simple aesthetic choice is actually a sophisticated visual cue, working directly with your brain chemistry to promote natural drowsiness. It's during these stargazing moments that Rick's typically impenetrable emotional armor often shows its cracks. His cynical facade temporarily falls away, revealing glimpses of the vulnerability he works so hard to conceal. These rare moments of emotional authenticity create a different kind of safety than what we experience at the breakfast table. Rather than the safety of routine, stargazing offers the safety of genuine connection. The sense that even in an infinite, chaotic universe, meaningful bonds still matter. This emotional resolution provides the perfect psychological conditions for your mind to feel secure enough to begin drifting toward sleep. The dialogue in these quieter scenes takes on a different quality too. Instead of rapid-fire jokes and sci-fi exposition, the conversation often turns philosophical, exploring themes of love, loss, and our place in the cosmos. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV, Morty tells Summer in one such moment, a line that paradoxically offers comfort through acceptance of life's fundamental uncertainties. These existential musings engage your mind just enough to distract from daily worries without requiring the active problem-solving that might keep you alert. What's particularly effective about these stargazing scenes is how they balance intellectual engagement with emotional release. Your brain remains lightly active with the philosophical questions being posed, but without the stress response that comes from trying to solve complex problems. This creates the perfect mental state for transitioning towards sleep, engaged enough to prevent anxious thoughts from intruding, but not so stimulated that you remain fully alert. The camera work during these scenes often pulls back to show characters from a distance, framed against the vastness of the night sky. This visual perspective mirrors what happens in our minds as we approach sleep. Our sense of self begins to dissolve, our problems seem smaller, and our consciousness expands beyond immediate concerns. The animated stars above Rick and Morty serve as visual focal points that encourage your eyes to unfocus slightly, just as they would naturally begin to do when you're getting sleepy. These stargazing moments also feature distinctive animation techniques that further enhance their sleep-inducing qualities. The frame rate subtly slows, creating smoother, more dreamlike movement. Character expressions hold longer, allowing your brain to process visual information more passively. Even the stars themselves sometimes appear to pulse gently, creating a hypnotic visual rhythm that guides your consciousness toward increasingly relaxed states. The emotional resonance of these scenes comes partly from their contrast with the rest of the show. After witnessing Rick and Morty narrowly escape death or cause interplanetary catastrophe, Seeing them simply exist together in quiet contemplation feels like an exhale, a release of tension that provides emotional closure. This narrative technique mirrors what our brains need before sleep: resolution of the day's emotional threads and permission to let go of unresolved tensions. What's most fascinating is how these contemplative moments often lead to emotional breakthroughs that would be impossible during the show's more frenetic sequences. Whether it's Rick admitting a rare moment of affection or Morty expressing a flash of wisdom beyond his years, these vulnerable exchanges create a sense of emotional safety. Your brain recognizes this resolution on a subconscious level, helping to quiet the emotional vigilance that often prevents deep relaxation. The philosophical questions raised under starry skies engage what sleep scientists call default mode network thinking, the kind of gentle, meandering thoughts that naturally occur as we drift towards sleep. Unlike problem-solving cognition that keeps us alert, this contemplative state allows your mind to process emotions and experiences without actively working toward solutions. It's the mental equivalent of floating rather than swimming, precisely the state you want to cultivate for sleep. That floating mental state doesn't just appear during stargazing scenes. It's deliberately engineered in Rick and Morty's memory montages, where time seems to stretch like taffy and reality blurs at the edges. These dreamlike sequences feel less like watching a show and more like experiencing someone else's memories firsthand, creating the perfect mental environment for drifting off to sleep. While we've explored how the show's quieter moments induce relaxation, these flowing memory sequences might actually be its most effective sleep aid. The memory montages throughout Rick and Morty feature a distinctly different animation style that mirrors what happens in your brain as you transition towards sleep. Notice how the edges of characters and objects become softer, almost watercolor-like, as if the boundaries of reality are dissolving right before your eyes. This visual softening isn't just an artistic choice. It's practically neuroscience in motion, mimicking how your brain processes information as consciousness begins to slip away. These sequences abandon the show's typical linear storytelling approach, instead opting for a flowing, non-linear structure where memories and moments blend together without clear transitions. This narrative technique parallels your brain's natural journey towards sleep, where logical thought patterns loosen their grip and allow more associative thinking to take over. When Rick recalls his relationship with Unity or reflects on his history with Bird Person, the memories don't unfold chronologically. They flow together based on emotional resonance, training your brain to release its attachment to logical processing. The visual language during these montages creates a soothing experience that eases your cognitive load. The animation team employs techniques that are specifically designed to be visually processing friendly. Smoother transitions between scenes, gentler color gradients, and slower camera movements all work together to reduce the mental effort required to follow along. This reduction in visual stimulation signals to your brain that it's safe to begin powering down its more active functions. What makes these sequences particularly effective for sleep induction is their musical accompaniment. During memory montages, the score shifts dramatically from the show's typical energetic compositions to more ambient, less structured soundscapes. These musical choices aren't random. They're deliberately designed to allow your brain to create its own patterns and associations rather than following a predetermined musical structure. The result is a soundtrack that engages your mind just enough to distract from anxious thoughts without demanding active listening. Perhaps most fascinating is how these sequences communicate deep emotional content without relying on dialogue. When Rick shows Morty his memories in The Rickshank Redemption, or when we see Beth's childhood flashbacks, the most profound emotional revelations happen through imagery alone. This visual storytelling bypasses our logical defenses and speaks directly to our emotional centers. Precisely the kind of communication our brains need as we prepare for sleep. These scenes resolve emotional conflicts through pure imagery, accessing deeper emotional states that words alone cannot reach. The memory sequences also utilize a unique pacing that seems intentionally designed to evoke nostalgia and reflection. This emotional quality is particularly soothing as you prepare for sleep. When we watch evil Morty's origin story unfold or see Rick's failed relationships flash before our eyes, The animation style and timing create a sense of gentle reflection rather than active engagement. This feeling of looking backward rather than forward is psychologically beneficial for sleep preparation, as it signals to your brain that the day's activities are complete and it's time for processing rather than planning. What's remarkable about these dreamlike montages is how they serve as a bridge between wakefulness and sleep. They don't just depict memories, they give viewers permission to begin their own dream construction. As you watch these flowing sequences of images and emotions, your mind naturally begins to form its own associative connections, preparing the mental environment necessary for dreams to form. It's as if the show is providing training wheels for your dream construction process. In episodes featuring memory implantation or manipulation, the show takes this dreamlike quality even further. When Rick accesses Morty's memories in Morty's Mind Blowers, or when false memories are implanted in the family, the resulting sequences feature visual distortions that mimic the brain's transition toward REM sleep. Colors blend together unnaturally, physical laws bend without explanation, and emotional connections become the primary organizing principle rather than logic or chronology. These memory sequences demonstrate how Rick and Morty uses visual storytelling to access emotional states that prepare us for sleep. By communicating through imagery rather than dialogue, these montages bypass our analytical mind and speak directly to our emotional centers. This technique mirrors how dreams communicate with our conscious mind, not through logical arguments, but through emotionally resonant symbols and scenarios. The beauty of these sequences lies in their ability to resolve emotional conflicts without explicit resolution. In the same way that dreams often process our unresolved emotions from the day, these memory montages show characters processing complex feelings through visual metaphor rather than direct confrontation. This approach gives your own mind permission to begin processing emotions in a similar way, easing the transition towards sleep by providing a model for how emotional content can be addressed without active problem solving. The cosmic perspective that makes all your problems seem delightfully insignificant might be the ultimate sleep aid hiding in plain sight throughout Rick and Morty. When Rick casually mentions that nothing matters in an infinite universe, he's not being nihilistic. He's accidentally providing the most effective bedtime philosophy ever created, releasing you from the weight of your daily concerns exactly when your mind needs it most. These existential moments are typically portrayed as revelations rather than depressing conclusions. The show brilliantly transforms what could be anxiety-inducing philosophy into a strange form of comfort. Think about it. When you're lying awake at night worried about tomorrow's presentation or that awkward thing you said 3 years ago, isn't there something oddly soothing about remembering you're just a tiny speck in an infinite cosmos? This perspective doesn't invalidate your experiences, but instead gives you permission to temporarily set them aside. What makes these existential moments so conducive to sleep is how they're visually constructed. The animation team deliberately uses the widest, most expansive shots during these sequences. When characters contemplate their place in the universe, the camera pulls back to show them dwarfed by the vastness of space, with deep blues and purples stretching into infinity. This visual technique mirrors what your brain needs to transition to sleep, a gradual expansion of perspective that makes your immediate concerns feel appropriately sized. Listen closely to how the characters speak during these philosophical sequences. There's a notable shift in vocal performance. Rick's usually manic delivery softens, his words become more measured, and his tone drops to a gentler register. Morty's anxiety-riddled voice finds moments of unexpected calm. This auditory change signals to your own nervous system that it's safe to lower your energy, matching the character's contemplative state with your own. The show's recurring message that nothing matters in an infinite universe might initially sound depressing, but in the context of sleep induction, it's surprisingly therapeutic. Sleep requires surrender. We cannot force ourselves to fall asleep through sheer will. Similarly, these existential moments in Rick and Morty suggest that accepting our lack of control over the universe paradoxically gives us a kind of freedom. The parallel is striking. Both sleep and existential acceptance require letting go of the illusion that we can control everything. These philosophical moments typically appear near episode conclusions, creating natural resolution points. After chaos and adventure, characters often find themselves staring into the void, coming to terms with what they've experienced. This narrative structure mirrors the ideal thought progression for falling asleep, from active problem-solving to acceptance and eventually surrender. By positioning these moments as conclusions rather than starting points, the show teaches viewers that existential contemplation can be an endpoint rather than the beginning of an anxiety spiral. The show explores this theme through Rick's complex relationship with Morty. Their dynamic often serves as a lens for examining existential questions, with Rick representing cynical awareness and Morty embodying the struggle to find meaning. In their quieter moments together, we see how this tension resolves into a strange kind of peace. Rick's cosmic perspective doesn't make him happier, but it does give him a freedom that Morty gradually begins to understand. This relationship creates emotional depth that makes the philosophical content more accessible and surprisingly comforting. What's fascinating is how the show uses expansive visuals to emphasize the cosmic scale of its existential themes. Beyond just talking about insignificance, the animation gives us a visceral sense of it. During scenes where characters contemplate their place in the universe, the frame often expands to reveal stunning cosmic vistas. These scenes utilize deep blues and purples that create a sense of infinite depth, encouraging viewers to lose themselves in the vastness. This visual approach mirrors what happens as we transition to sleep. Our focus broadens, becomes less defined, and eventually dissolves. The acceptance of cosmic insignificance throughout the series suggests an unexpected path to peace. When characters stop fighting against the chaos of existence and instead embrace it, they often find a kind of serenity. This mirrors the process of falling asleep, where struggling against consciousness usually backfires. It's only when we accept that we cannot force sleep that our minds finally quiet down enough to allow it to happen naturally. In episodes where characters confront their deepest fears or existential dilemmas, the narrative often builds toward a moment of acceptance or realization. These narrative arcs serve as emotional resolution points, allowing characters to process their experiences and emerge with a new understanding. For viewers approaching sleep, these resolution moments model how to conclude the day's emotional processing before transitioning to rest. The show's philosophical undertones might seem too intellectually stimulating for bedtime content, but they function more like thought experiments that ultimately exhaust the logical mind. By presenting questions with no definitive answers, Rick and Morty creates mental cul-de-sacs that eventually tire out your analytical thinking. Your brain, realizing there's no conclusion to reach, gradually surrenders to a more diffuse state of consciousness, exactly what's needed for the transition to sleep. Most sleep meditation techniques encourage focusing on the breath or body to anchor awareness in the present moment. Rick and Morty's existential scenes offer a different approach, expanding awareness so completely that individual concerns lose their grip. When Rick reminds us we're all tiny specks in an infinite cosmos, he's unintentionally providing the perfect meditation for an overactive mind. This cosmic perspective doesn't eliminate your problems, but temporarily suspends their perceived importance, creating mental space for rest. There's a surprising psychological benefit to this approach. Research suggests that perspective-taking exercises can reduce anxiety by helping people contextualize their concerns. By temporarily adopting the view from above, seeing yourself as part of something vastly larger, you can gain distance from immediate worries. Rick and Morty's existential moments essentially function as cinematic perspective-taking exercises, training viewers to momentarily step outside their individual concerns and view them from a cosmic scale. If the cosmic perspective gives your mind a philosophical anchor for sleep, the subtle magic of Rick and Morty's sound design works through an entirely different neurological pathway. Beyond the visuals lies an aural dimension that might be the true sleep aid, hidden within the show's chaotic adventures. When we isolate the musical elements from their visual counterparts, composer Ryan Elder's work reveals itself as an intricate tapestry specifically designed to guide listeners toward relaxation. Elder doesn't just create memorable themes. He's crafting auditory environments that operate on multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. Those recurring musical motifs you hear throughout the series aren't just for thematic consistency. They're creating neural patterns of familiarity that your brain subconsciously recognizes from episode to episode. This recognition triggers a sense of safety and predictability, exactly what your nervous system needs to begin the transition towards sleep. It's like musical breadcrumbs your brain follows home to rest. The synthesizer choices throughout the score deserve special attention. Elder frequently employs specific sound textures that mimic natural white noise patterns, creating an auditory environment where intrusive thoughts struggle to maintain a foothold. These synthetic sounds mask environmental disturbances while establishing a consistent sonic foundation, essentially building a protective audio bubble around your consciousness. What makes Elder's approach particularly effective for sleep induction is his layering technique. Listen carefully and you'll notice how he combines multiple musical elements, rhythmic percussion, ambient pads, melodic fragments, creating a complexity that engages your brain just enough to distract from anxious thoughts without demanding your full attention. This delicate balance keeps your mind from wandering to tomorrow's worries while preventing it from becoming too stimulated. Perhaps most fascinating is Elder's intentional use of specific frequency ranges throughout the soundtrack. Certain musical passages employ frequencies that research has shown promote theta brainwaves, the neural state associated with deep relaxation and pre-sleep conditions. These aren't random compositional choices, but deliberate attempts to guide your brainwave activity toward the patterns necessary for sleep onset. In interviews, Elder has discussed his conscious intention to create music that complements the show's themes of chaos and absurdity while simultaneously allowing for moments of calm introspection. This duality makes the soundtrack particularly effective as a sleep aid. The music acknowledges the chaotic nature of existence, much like our racing thoughts at bedtime, while providing structured resolution that helps our minds organize those thoughts. Pay attention to how Elder employs subtle tempo manipulations throughout certain pieces. Many compositions begin at a moderate pace before gradually slowing, unconsciously training your heart rate to follow suit. This technique mirrors how our bodies naturally prepare for sleep, with gradually decreasing heart rates and respiration. The music essentially models the physiological process of relaxation for your body to follow. The emotional architecture of the soundtrack supports our journey towards sleep by engaging what sleep researchers call passive attention. This is the ideal mental state for sleep onset, where your mind is occupied enough to prevent rumination but not so engaged that it maintains full wakefulness. Elder's compositions strike this balance perfectly, particularly in scenes where Rick works in his garage or during space travel sequences. What's particularly clever about the show's musical approach is how it creates a hidden structure throughout the seemingly chaotic narrative. The recurring themes act as emotional anchors, giving your subconscious mind familiar touchpoints as you drift between episodes and dimensions. This structure operates beneath your conscious awareness, creating a sense of safety and predictability that's essential for deep relaxation. The soundtrack's effectiveness doesn't just come from individual elements, but from their interaction. The layered approach creates what neuroscientists call an auditory matrix, a complex sound environment that occupies multiple attention channels simultaneously. This prevents your brain from latching onto any single element that might trigger alertness or anxiety, instead creating a gentle current that carries your consciousness towards sleep. Elder's compositions often feature what musicians call resolving progressions, chord sequences that establish tension before moving toward harmony. This musical journey mirrors the emotional experience we need for sleep, acknowledging the day's difficulties before finding resolution. It's essentially emotional storytelling without words, guiding us through the process of letting go. Even the sound design choices between scenes serve sleep induction. Notice how the transitions between musical moments avoid jarring changes in volume or tempo, instead creating gentle crossfades that maintain the relaxation state. This continuity prevents the micro-awakenings that more abrupt sound changes might trigger, keeping you in that perfect pre-sleep zone. The soundtrack's effectiveness extends beyond composition to mixing decisions. The bass frequencies are often emphasized in ways that create physical resonance. You don't just hear the music, you feel it at a subtle level. This multi-sensory approach engages your body's relaxation response more completely than visual stimuli alone could achieve. Through these deliberate choices, Elder creates what might be called a sleep curriculum, hidden within the show's soundtrack. Each musical element builds upon the previous, gradually training your nervous system to associate these sounds with relaxation. By the time you've watched several episodes, your brain has essentially been conditioned to prepare for sleep when these familiar audio patterns emerge. Beyond the carefully crafted soundscapes lies something even more powerful for sleep induction: those fleeting moments of silence after the storm. When Rick and Morty's adventures conclude and the frenetic energy dissipates, the show transforms into something unexpected. A masterclass in emotional decompression that mirrors exactly what our brains need to finally surrender. To sleep. These epilogue moments, those brief seconds before the credits roll, serve as emotional anchors that provide viewers with a reflective pause, contrasting sharply with the chaos that typically defines the series. What makes these scenes so perfect for our final descent into sleep isn't just their quieter nature, but how they embody the very mental state we're trying to achieve when we close our eyes at night: acceptance, reflection, and emotional resolution. The animation during these concluding moments employs a distinctly different visual language than the rest of the episode. Notice how the camera lingers, allowing for extended shots that emphasize the characters' emotional states without rushing to the next joke or plot point. This visual patience trains your mind to slow down as well, matching the natural deceleration of consciousness that precedes sleep. The animators deliberately employ cooler, darker color palettes during these epilogue sequences, signaling to your brain that the day's adventures have concluded and it's time for rest. Take the ending of A Rick Convenient Mort as the perfect example. As the episode winds down, we witness Morty grappling with heartbreak and the complexities of love. What makes this moment so powerful is the complete absence of comedic elements. No quick cuts, no absurdist humor to break the tension. Instead, we're given space to simply exist with Morty in his genuine pain, creating an emotional authenticity that resonates deeply as we prepare for sleep. These ending sequences rarely overburden you with dialogue. Instead, the sparse contemplative exchanges allow your mind to process emotional content passively rather than actively. This reduced verbal load naturally encourages your brain to transition from analytical thinking to the more diffuse associative thought patterns of pre-sleep states. When words do appear, they tend to avoid concrete conclusions, instead opening emotional questions that can gently carry into your dreams. What's fascinating about these epilogue scenes is how they model the exact state of mental surrender we need to achieve for sleep. Rick and Morty often end their adventures simply existing together in silence, sometimes in the ship, sometimes gazing at stars, sometimes just sitting side by side. This shared quiet presence demonstrates the peaceful coexistence of thoughts we strive for as we drift off. Not an empty mind, but a mind at peace with its contents. The Season 6 finale offers another perfect example of this emotional resonance. After Rick achieves his long-sought revenge against Rick Prime, we witness him confronting the reality of his relationship with Morty. The music choice, a nostalgic track that calls back to earlier episodes, underscores the weight of this moment. Rather than celebrating his victory, Rick experiences a profound sense of loss and reflection on what truly matters. This emotional complexity creates the perfect mental environment for transitioning into dreams, where our brains continue processing unresolved feelings. The show's score during these epilogue moments deserves special attention. Unlike the melodic completeness we hear during action sequences, the music in these final scenes often avoids full resolution, creating a gentle emotional suspension that parallels the transition between wakefulness and sleep. The compositions typically employ sustained notes and ambient textures rather than driving rhythms, allowing your consciousness to float rather than march forward. There's something particularly powerful about how these endings frequently underscore the relationship between Rick and Morty. In Fear No Morty, we witness an especially poignant moment where Morty realizes his deepest fears about being replaceable in Rick's life. This revelation isn't communicated through exposition, but through a series of emotional visual sequences highlighting Morty's internal struggles. The scene culminates in Rick making a meaningful choice, honoring Morty's feelings rather than pursuing his own desires. This kind of emotional authenticity creates a sense of security that's essential for relaxation and sleep. These quiet epilogues serve another crucial function. They provide emotional closure to the chaos that preceded them. Just as our brains require a sense of resolution before releasing into sleep, these moments give us permission to set aside the narrative tensions of the episode. They signal that it's okay to let go of the story for now, with the unspoken promise that new adventures await tomorrow. Notice how the camera work during these closing scenes often pulls back physically, creating visual distance that mirrors our own mental detachment as we prepare for sleep. The wide framing places characters within a broader context, sometimes literal cosmic vastness, reminding us that our individual concerns exist within a larger picture. This perspective shift is profoundly calming, reducing the urgency of our thoughts. The color therapy happening in these epilogues is no accident either. The animation team deliberately transitions from the vibrant, high-contrast palettes of adventure sequences to softer, more muted tones. Blues and purples dominate, colors scientifically proven to reduce heart rate and blood pressure. This visual downshift works directly with your body's natural chemistry, promoting the physical relaxation necessary for sleep onset. What ultimately makes these quiet epilogues so perfect for our final transition to sleep is their emotional honesty. In a show that often hides vulnerability beneath layers of cynicism and humor, these moments strip away the defenses to reveal something genuine. We see characters processing grief, finding connection, or simply acknowledging the weight of existence. This authenticity creates a psychological safety that tells our nervous system it's okay to lower its guard and surrender to sleep. As we experience these final, peaceful moments together, allow your consciousness to fully surrender, just as Rick and Morty often surrender to the quiet after their adventures. Let your thoughts become as sparse and reflective as their epilogue dialogues. Allow your mental imagery to adopt the cooler tones and slower pacing of these closing scenes. And most importantly, embrace the emotional resolution these moments provide. Not perfect resolution, but the acceptance that some questions can remain open as we drift into dreams. As we've journeyed through these soothing moments in Rick and Morty, we've uncovered something profound beneath the show's chaotic exterior. The creators themselves have emphasized that these quieter scenes serve as emotional anchors, allowing us not just to catch our breath between adventures, but to reflect on our own lives and relationships. It's in these peaceful interludes that the show's deeper philosophical messages emerge. Time heals all wounds, but old wounds can reopen. This quote captures the show's nuanced exploration of emotional pain and healing. But perhaps the most powerful message comes in another line. In a universe where everything is meaningless, the connections we make are what give us purpose. This perfectly encapsulates what makes Rick and Morty special. Amid cosmic nihilism and interdimensional madness, the show consistently returns to the idea that relationships and moments of genuine connection provide the only meaning we truly need. As your consciousness drifts towards sleep, remember that even in a meaningless multiverse, the quiet moments of contemplation and connection we've explored together are what make existence worthwhile. Good night, fellow travelers of the multiverse.